They skipped my husband's funeral to eat cake at my sister's birthday party. I didn't scream. I didn't cry to them. I didn't beg for their love. Instead, I took that betrayal, swallowed it whole, and used it to legally and financially lock them out of my life and the multi-million-dollar future they quietly thought they had a claim to. Welcome to Revenge Theory. My name is Cindy Johnson, and I'm about to show you why the most dangerous woman in the room is the one who stops asking for permission and starts signing her own contracts. There is absolutely no poetic or beautiful way to say the sentence I had to say over the phone that morning. It was a Tuesday in late October. The sky outside my kitchen window was aggressively, stubbornly ordinary. I remember staring at the neighbor's oak tree, watching the leaves rustle, feeling deeply offended by the sheer normality of the world. How could the sun still be shining? How could the mail truck still be doing its rounds? The universe was moving forward, but my entire world had just flatlined. "He's gone," I said into the phone. I don't remember breathing between the words. I was holding onto the marble countertop so tightly my knuckles were entirely white. I was waiting for my father to say something, anything. I was waiting for the gasp, the sudden drop in his voice, the immediate comfort of a parent realizing their child's life has just been irrevocably broken. There was a pause on the other end of the line, but it wasn't the kind of pause filled with shock or empathy. If you've grown up in a family like mine, you know exactly the pause I'm talking about. It was the kind of pause filled with calculation. Then my father answered. His voice was steady, composed, and chillingly pragmatic. "Cindy, today is your sister's birthday. We have reservations at the country club. We can't come over right now." There was no anger in his voice. There was no apology. It was just pure, cold logistics. In the silence that followed, something inside of me shifted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't some dramatic movie moment where I threw my phone against the wall or collapsed into a puddle of tears. It was just a quiet, internal reorganization. It felt exactly like heavy furniture being moved around in a dark room. I said, "Okay," and I hung up the phone. That was the exact second the Cindy Johnson they knew ceased to exist. The funeral was held 3 days later. If you want to know who your real people are, wait until you have nothing left to offer them. The turnout was a surreal mix of humanity. People I barely knew showed up. Colleagues of my late husband arrived in dark suits, looking genuinely devastated. Parents from my children's school, people I only exchanged small talk with in the pickup line, were there offering their shoulders. Even my neighbor, a man who had once filed a noise complaint about our dog barking, stood outside in the freezing rain, holding a massive black umbrella over my head without saying a single word. He just stood there, taking the rain on his own shoulders to keep me dry. But inside the church, it was a different story. Right there, in the second row, dead center, were 2 empty seats, reserved for my parents. They remained empty for the entire service. I kept looking at them. I couldn't help it. My brain was trying to process the visual evidence of their absence. I didn't cry the way I expected to. I thought I would be a hysterical mess, unable to stand, unable to speak. Instead, I functioned. I operated on a frequency of pure survival. I signed the burial papers. I approved the floral arrangements. I nodded politely when people offered their condolences. Grief, I learned that week, isn't always a weeping willow. Sometimes grief is highly administrative. It's a series of tasks. Later that afternoon, after the hardest day of my life concluded, I sat alone in my dark living room. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. I opened it. It was a notification from our family group chat. I opened it. It was a collage of photos, pink balloons, a lavish multi-tiered cake with glittering sparkler candles, and right in the center, my sister smiling brightly in front of a massive banner that read, "Celebrate." There was no caption acknowledging where I was that day, no "thinking of you, Cindy," no private message checking to see if I made it through the burial without collapsing. It was a complete and utter erasure of my reality. I stared at the glowing screen for what felt like hours. I watched the video clip of them singing "Happy Birthday" while my husband was being lowered into the earth. Slowly, deliberately, I swiped left on the chat. I hit mute, then I hit hide. That was the very first boundary I ever set with my family without announcing it, and it was just the beginning. Here on Revenge Theory, we talk a lot about the anatomy of a comeback. People think revenge is about destroying someone else. That's amateur hour. Real revenge, professional, undeniable revenge, is about building yourself up so high that the people who hurt you can't even afford the oxygen at your altitude. The weeks that followed were not cinematic. There were no dramatic breakdowns on the kitchen floor accompanied by sad indie music. There was paperwork. There was life insurance. There were endless, exhausting meetings with bankers and attorneys. It was the brutal dissolution of a future I had completely memorized. My husband had owned a very successful mid-sized consulting firm. We had built a beautiful life around it. We had always intended to grow it slowly, thoughtfully. He used to joke that he would retire early, buy a boat, and spend his golden years embarrassing our children at their college graduations. Instead of planning vacations, I was now sitting across a mahogany table with his business partners, learning the dense, complicated mechanics of corporate succession clauses. And something incredible happened. The grief that threatened to drown me actually rearranged itself into hyper-focus. I didn't run from the numbers, I leaned into them. I discovered things I hadn't paid attention to before. The contracts, the leverage, the immense financial power my husband had accumulated, which was now legally sitting in my lap. But more importantly, I discovered something else, a deeply ingrained psychological assumption my parents had always held about me. In my family's dynamic, my sister was the golden child. I was the scapegoat. My parents had always assumed I was the fragile one, the overly emotional one, the one who would inevitably fail, break down, and come running back to them to be saved when things got too hard. They skipped the funeral because they genuinely believed my husband's death would break me, and they wanted to avoid the inconvenience of my grief. They thought I would come crawling back to them begging for financial and emotional support. 6 months passed, 6 entire months, without a single visit from them. There were a few generic text messages, a short, awkward phone call where my mother finally said, "We just didn't know what to say to you, Cindy." I replied, my voice steady, "You didn't have to say anything. You just had to come." She didn't answer. She just changed the subject. I started going to therapy. But therapy didn't work the way people usually expect it to. It didn't make me softer. It didn't make me more forgiving. It made me clearer. It removed the fog of obligation. I stopped trying to extract comfort from a dry well. I stopped waiting for people who had already shown me their absolute limits to suddenly develop empathy. I took all that abandoned energy and poured it directly into the company, not to distract myself, but because it was the one thing in my life I could still control. I could still influence its trajectory. I worked closely with our lead corporate attorney. We reviewed the entire estate plan. I started making executive decisions. My husband had once casually drafted a charitable clause, a scholarship fund in our children's names to help underprivileged kids go to college. It was a beautiful idea he never got around to finalizing. I didn't just finalize it, I weaponized it. I turned that simple clause into a massive, heavily structured memorial foundation. Not a grand, flashy vanity project, but a quiet, impenetrable legal fortress. It was fully documented, completely transparent, and legally bulletproof. Working with my legal team, I executed a masterstroke. I transferred all of my controlling shares of the consulting firm, along with the bulk of my liquid inheritance, directly into an irrevocable trust, governed by a board of directors for the foundation. And then I stepped into the role of managing director, quietly, competently, without a single post on social media. No one in my toxic family asked about the business during those 6 months. They assumed I was drowning in debt or grief. They assumed I was liquidating assets just to stay afloat. They had no idea I was sitting at the head of a boardroom expanding a multi-million-dollar portfolio. Until the article came out. It was a Tuesday, almost exactly 8 months after the funeral. A highly respected regional business journal ran a front-page feature piece. The headline read, "Widowed Executive Establishes Multi-Million-Dollar Memorial Foundation. Cindy Johnson Steps Up as Managing Director." The article detailed my takeover of the firm, the massive success of our recent quarter, and the establishment of the trust. It even had a small, subtle line where the reporter noted, "Johnson declined to comment on family mediation regarding the estate." I hadn't asked for the publicity, but foundations require transparency, and business journals love a good resilience story. The reporter framed it as a heroic comeback. I didn't correct him. By 3 p.m. that afternoon, my phone, which had been dead silent for months, started vibrating non-stop. My father's name appeared on the caller ID 5 times in a row. Then my mother's. Then my sister's. It is amazing, isn't it, how the smell of money and power can cure amnesia. The people who couldn't find the time to attend a burial suddenly had all the time in the world to make a phone call. When I finally answered on the 6th ring, my father's voice sounded entirely unfamiliar. The cold, dismissive tone from the day my husband died was gone. Instead, it was replaced by a frantic, breathless panic. "Cindy, what is this? Why are we finding out from a damn newspaper that you've structured everything legally? Why is everything in a trust?" he demanded. I let the silence hang for 3 seconds. Then I spoke. "Because you didn't come when I called," I replied. Silence on his end. I could hear him breathing. I could hear the gears turning as he realized the fragile daughter he thought he knew was nowhere to be found. He cleared his throat, adopting a tone of fake parental authority. "We should meet. This shouldn't be handled publicly. You are part of this family, and family assets should be discussed together." "It wasn't public," I said flatly. "It was documented, and if you want to meet, we can meet. I'll send you a calendar invite." We scheduled the meeting, but not at their house, not at my house. We met at my attorney's office in the financial district downtown. If you want to establish dominance, never fight on their turf. Make them come to your fortress. The conference room was neutral, imposing, and stripped of all emotion. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooking the city skyline. A long, polished wooden table, chilled water pitchers placed deliberately in the center. I sat at the head of the table. My attorney, a shark of a man in a bespoke suit, sat calmly to my right, his files perfectly aligned. My parents arrived 10 minutes early. When they walked through the glass doors, they looked older, smaller. The dynamic had completely shifted, and they felt it the second they stepped into the room. My father tried to smile when he saw me. It was a tight, synthetic smile that didn't reach his eyes. He went to pull out a chair right next to me. "Take the seats across the table, please," I said, pointing my pen at the opposite side. We exchanged minimal, sterile pleasantries. Then my attorney took over. He opened his leather folder and began outlining the trust structure. He read the terms in a flat, clinical voice: voting rights, irrevocable clauses, distribution restrictions, ironclad legal walls protecting every single dime. Halfway through the presentation, my father couldn't take it anymore. He slammed his hand flat on the table, interrupting the lawyer. "So what you're saying," he spat, glaring at the attorney, "is that her family, her blood, has absolutely no input, no access, no advisory role in this foundation or the estate?" My attorney didn't even blink. He looked up, adjusted his glasses, and answered evenly, "The board governs the foundation, sir." He gestured slightly toward me. "And Mrs. Johnson serves as the sole managing director. All financial decisions require her direct approval. The family has no legal standing." My mother leaned forward, her voice trembling, trying to play the ultimate manipulation card. "Cindy, we are your parents." I met her gaze. My face was a mask of absolute calm. "Yes, you are." There was a time in my life, maybe a year ago, when that sentence would have softened me. It would have triggered my guilt. I would have folded. But sitting in that boardroom, looking at the woman who chose cake over my husband's casket, the phrase, "we are your parents," meant absolutely nothing. It simply described biology, nothing more. My father tried to reel it back in, adopting a softer, negotiating tone. "We just assumed, Cindy. We assumed that we would be involved in your future, that we would help you manage this transition." "In what way?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet. He hesitated, and right there in that hesitation the truth hung in the air. The absence of specifics. They didn't want to help me heal. They wanted proximity to the wealth. They wanted the expectation of control without ever having to put in the work or the love. "Financial matters should stay within the family," he finally said, crossing his arms. I looked at him, then at my mother. "They are," I replied smoothly. "My husband and my children were my family. You are just relatives." The room didn't explode. No one shouted, no one threw a glass of water, no one wept, because the authority in that space wasn't emotional, it was structural. It was built on documented signatures, legal boundaries, and a quiet, terrifying finality. For the first time in my entire existence, my father realized he had absolutely nothing to override. He couldn't ground me, he couldn't guilt me, he couldn't threaten to cut me off because I had already bought the entire island. He tried a different angle, the victim card. "We didn't realize you felt so abandoned, Cindy. If we had known—" I cut him off. "I don't feel abandoned anymore." I adjusted. That word, adjusted, seemed to land harder than any screaming match ever could have. Anger shows that you still care. Adjustment shows that you have moved on. My mother asked, her voice cracking, if we could start fresh, if we could move forward, if I would reconsider a shared trusteeship just to keep the family united. I declined. Not dramatically, not with bitterness, just a steady, unshakable no. The Foundation Board has already voted. The governance documents were filed weeks ago. My decision isn't reactive to this conversation, it's complete. When the meeting ended, my mother reached across the table to touch my hand. I let her touch it, briefly. There was no hatred in me anymore, just an oceanic, permanent distance. Outside the building, the city air felt sharp and clean. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment before walking to my car. I didn't feel a massive surge of triumphant joy. I didn't pump my fist in the air. What I felt was a strange, beautiful steadiness. Grief had taken everything loud from me, the future, the noise, the childish illusion that blood automatically translates to loyalty. What remained was precision. That evening, the family group chat went completely silent. No one sent photos, no one sent passive-aggressive updates. They finally understood something they had never comprehended before. Access to me was no longer an automatic birthright. It required permission, and my permission was no longer something I gave out of habit or guilt. Do I still miss my husband? Every single day. That doesn't fade, it just changes shape. But I no longer miss chasing acknowledgement from people who weighed the loss of my life partner against a birthday cake and chose the cake. 6 months ago, I called them in pieces, begging for a lifeline. Today, I don't call them at all, and it's not because I'm angry, it's because I'm finished. To anyone listening to this on revenge theory right now, I want you to hear me clearly. We are taught that revenge is a toxic emotion. We are told to be the bigger person, to forget and forgive. But let me tell you the reality. Sometimes forgiveness is just a sophisticated form of self-sabotage. You do not owe your success to the people who abandoned you in your darkest hour. You do not owe your success, your peace, or your future to people who only respect you once you have leverage. If you are dealing with a toxic family dynamic, narcissistic parents, or people who use weaponized incompetence to drain you, stop trying to fight them with emotion. Narcissists feed on your emotional reactions. When you cry, they win. When you scream, they win. When you try to explain your pain to them, you're just giving them a roadmap to your triggers. Stop talking. Start building. Take your grief, your anger, and your betrayal and metabolize it into pure, unadulterated ambition. Read the contracts, learn the business, save your money, hire the lawyer, set up the trust, build a fortress so high and so legally tight that by the time they realize you're no longer playing their game, they can't even afford the ticket to watch you play your own. My name is Cindy Johnson. I lost my husband, but I found my empire. And my family? They are still waiting for a phone call that is never, ever coming. Thank you for tuning in to Revenge Theory. If my story resonated with you, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs to hear that their pain can become their greatest power. Keep building, keep your boundaries ironclad, and remember, success isn't just sweet, it's the ultimate mic drop. See you in the next video.